Amendment number 23, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Garamendi of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 333, the gentleman from California and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm kind of trying to figure out where to start with this because we're making progress. I guess the purpose of this amendment is to give this whole process a swift kick so we can actually do something that's absolutely necessary. Chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee really has it correct. And I want to read the language of the appropriation bill, with which I happen to agree this evening, but not the result. In 7 of the last 10 years, the Forest Service and the Department of Interior have exceeded their wildland fire suppression budgets, despite being fully funded at the 10-year suppression average for such costs. Fire seasons have grown longer and more destructive, putting people, communities, and ecosystems at greater risk. Fire borrowing has now become routine rather than extraordinary. Borrowing from non-fire accounts to pay suppression costs results in the Forest Service and the Department of Interior having fewer resources available for forest management activities, including hazardous fuel management and other proven efforts to improve overall forest health and reduce the risk of catastrophic wildland fires. Mr. Chairman of the subcommittee, you have it right. You and your committee staff have done the right analysis, but haven't completed the follow-through to achieve that goal. I see our good friend from Idaho standing nearby, and he has a bill, a very, very fine bill, to deal with this. That would basically create 2 separate accounts. Now, understanding the necessity of proper order and being out of order, which sometimes I am, I'm not proposing that we adopt the good gentleman from Idaho's bill in this bill. But I got a different idea. And I'm going to take this idea from my Republican colleagues who have created so many fiscal crises, otherwise known as cliffs, to create one. And basically what I'm doing here with this amendment is saying you can't borrow from other accounts. And when you run out of money, my goodness, we have a crisis. And we'll have to then adopt my good friend from Idaho's legislation and solve the problem once and for all. So that's what this amendment does. It says you can't borrow from other accounts to fight wildfires, which means that we're going to have to come to grips with the reality of our funding crisis, where we cannot get ahead of the wildland fires, where there is a necessity for us to spend money on protecting the forest, on forest health, thinning, other kinds of things, fire breaks and the like, so that we just don't burn down all the forest, but get around with the proper management. Yep, this is what you call kicking the issue into gear. And with that, I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Does the gentleman from Idaho wish to rise in opposition?
Claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. I understand what he's trying to do, and we're on the same page, actually, and ultimately what we want to accomplish with this. The fact is that we appropriate money, and the Interior Subcommittee has done it for several years now, and Chairman Calvert has done it in this bill, where we fund, under the FLAME Act, the 10-year average of what it costs to fight wildfires. Unfortunately, I think it's in 8 of the last 10 years we've exceeded that 10-year average, and consequently, when money runs out for fighting wildfires, what we do, what the Forest Service does, is borrow that money from other accounts. And we sometimes complain that the Forest Service doesn't go out and do the thinning that's necessary, or do the restoration that's necessary, or do the trail maintenance that's necessary. The reason they can't do it is because we've borrowed all the money to fight wildfires, and we're trying to prevent that wildfire borrowing. It's one thing to try to prevent it in a manner that will address the problem, and another to just say you can't borrow. Because I would hate to be in the situation where we run up against a fire year where we are going to exceed the 10-year average, we run out of fire fighting money, and there's no way to get the resources in order to fund the fires that are occurring in the latter part of the year. This would put pressure on for Congress to probably do something. As you know, there's a challenge with the Budget Committee that we've been working with, trying to address this issue. There is some language in, as I understand it, in the Senate Interior Bill dealing with the wildfire fighting costs and how we handle that. There is some language in a bill that will be before us, I think, this week, Healthy Forest Bill out of the Resources Committee. I think more and more people are starting to realize that we've got to address this problem. There is absolutely no reason that wildfires should not be treated as other natural disasters are: hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, other things. But for some reason, we treat wildfires differently, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So we've had various proposals. I've talked with the administration, with the Department of Interior, with the Forest Service, with many other people trying to come to a resolution on this, and there are many people on both the Republican and the Democratic side of the aisle that are trying to address this, and I am hopeful that we are inching ever closer, because, you know, things don't move as quickly as we would like oftentimes in Congress. We are moving, inching closer, I would hope, to finding the solution to this, and there are different ideas out there about how to go about doing exactly what the gentleman from California and I and the chairman all want to do, and that is quit the fire borrowing so that the Forest Service can do the job that we appropriate the money for them to do. But given that this could create some real problems, I appreciate what the gentleman is trying to do, but I would have to oppose the amendment. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The chair would like to remind members not to traffic the well. Gentleman from California is recognized.
You weren't talking about me, were you?
Gentleman is correct.
My good friend from Idaho has it right. His bill ought to become the law. And you did find a way to fund it. The same way we fund hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, and like out of FEMA. Good bill. By the way, I'm the co-author of it. Thank you very much. Only you can prevent forest fires. How many times have we seen Smokey the Bear? But Congress can help. I want to congratulate, and I really want to thank my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, because you're in a position to lead on this. This amendment's in a position to cause action. That's all it is. Would we have a disaster? We're going to have a fire disaster. There's no doubt about it. Would we have a financing disaster? Probably, but we can solve it. We can solve it both with legislation, and then we can solve it with a piece of legislation moving through this House that would reach back to the FEMA money, where we always stack a huge stash of money for the eventuality of a disaster. We reach back and say, okay, that's how we're going to do it going forward. I think it's about time for me to yield. I probably don't have much more time, but I'm kind of stirring the pot here. I'm trying to kick this into gear, and I'm delighted to work with the good language that the chairman of the committee has put into the bill, and had I the time, I'd read once again your analysis of the problem and also your analysis of the solution. That's found in this year, H.R. 167. A fine piece of legislation by an outstanding gentleman from Idaho. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Idaho is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for his comments and his help on trying to get us to a resolution on this, and I'm sure working together we can solve this problem eventually. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment.